growing up, I not only was closeted, I was actively homophobic. When I was younger, I wrote a lot of really, really hurtful homophobic stuff in the newspapers. But then, one of the things that I realized is that if there's an internal conflict within you, you're never truly happy. The customer's greatest frustrations should be your greatest source of inspiration. We were gonna put that fun in funeral. And we created an ad that, oh my God, it became viral. Why? Because at first glance, the ad looks like a cosmetic ad.
How do you navigate that journey and inspire folks that, similar to your story, it is possible being Asian, being gay, being relatively old, and having that second wind to be able to find your groove again and continuously thrive?
I woke up in a state of existential panic. I was like, my gosh, what did I do? What am I going to do? I'm going to go home unemployed.
Welcome to Meaningful Marketing, Mentoring, Mattering with me, Joseph Alcantara. Together, we'll uncover the power of purpose, experience mentorship magic, unpack ways to make a difference, and find transformative journeys as a community. Welcome to Meaningful Marketing, Mentoring, Mattering with me, Joseph Alcantara. This month, we're celebrating Pride and honoring the LGBTQ plus community's profound impact on society. Join us as we explore stories of courage, authenticity, trailblazing contributions, and how the community's involvement shapes a more inclusive world. Before we dive in, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and notification bell so you're updated every time we have a new episode. Today, we have a very special guest with us. He's a friend and he's a co-volunteer in one of the nonprofits that I support, Francis Miranda. He's also an advertising veteran and a partner in Tagline 360, an ad agency with offices in Manila, New York, and Boston. He also runs Skills Simplified, a corporate training company based here in Boston. A public speaker by heart, his speaking engagements have taken him to places like Spain, the Philippines, the United Kingdom, Singapore, Malaysia, China, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. He is also passionate about teaching and doing improv comedy, as well as performing as a stand-up comedian. When he's not traveling, he's at home taking care of his 3 cats and wonders when he will officially cross over to the level of a crazy cat lady. Please welcome to the pod, Francis Miranda.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. It's such an honor to be here today.
Thank you so much for saying yes and also for sharing your wonderful bio. When I read through it, I was like, oh my God, this guy is such a talented dude, but also at the same time, very multifaceted. I cannot imagine someone who's like a great advertising strategist, a great public speaker, and also a stand-up comedian. But we'll dive deeper into that later on. I would want to ask you first the same first question that I ask all my guests, and that would be, what is your meaningful life story? Take us back to your origin story, your background, and your lived experience that led you to where you are today.
Well, it's funny because when I first found out about what the podcast was all about, meaningful, right? So of course the thought is, what is meaningful for me, right? And for me, my definition of meaningful is what gives life its meaning. So I wanted to go into that, right? And for me, when I started to look into what I feel gives my life meaning, it's really more about how to empower and inspire people using my gifts. And I guess that started many, many years ago. Just like you, I came from the Philippines. And one of the things that in the Philippines is that we have this cultural trait that if you are the eldest child, which I am, the panganay in our language, in Tagalog, right? When you're the panganay, it's like all the responsibilities are lumped on your shoulders. And, I come from a big family where we're 6 siblings. And being the eldest kid, all of the responsibilities on my shoulders. And the funny thing was, I grew up actually in an ultra conservative Catholic world. My mom belonged to this organization called Opus Dei. I grew up in an Opus Dei school. I studied in the Opus Dei high school. I went to an Opus Dei university. Even my first job in Spain, I was working for the University of Opus Dei, and then I worked for an ad agency which was run by somebody in Opus Dei, and that kind of like colored my worldview. The thing though is that in these schools, like for example in Southridge, one of the things though that was very important for me growing up was, despite the conservatism, what I appreciated about the way they ran the school was there was this thing called the virtue of the month. So there was a strong push on virtues, which means these are just repetitive actions that you do over and over and over again until they become habits. And these habits, they become second nature to you. And some of the foundational virtues that help propel me in my career, I learned at an early age from school. Like, for example, industriousness, hard work, things like those. Um, um, Caring for other people, prudence, not jumping at the first instance, thinking things through. A lot of these things, they were drilled in my mind when I was growing up, and for that, I really appreciated that. I went in. I came from this super conservative school, but then they gave me the great foundations that helped me push myself into the wonderful world of advertising. So in the high school, I realized that I'm a great communicator. In the university, I discovered that I'm a good marketer. I'm doing well in this. So I wound up going into the marketing and advertising world, which I loved. I've been in the world for 25 years. I still am in it right now, but I've also kind of transitioned half in my life. So when I hit the big 40, so I'm that old. Okay, so I when I
You're
hit
dating yourself.
so when I hit the big 40, I had like a midlife crisis where I said, do I still want to do advertising full time? So when I hit the big 40, I actually decided I was going to semi-retire from advertising and try to do something else. And that's where I decided that I wanted to become a speaker and a trainer. And why is that? Because I felt like that was aligned to the story of meaningfulness. How can I give meaning? And one of my greatest strengths, which I believe in, is really my ability to speak. When I was working in advertising, that was my job. I was the guy who was in charge of presenting and pitching. So I said, okay, maybe I can apply that to another career. So at 40, I decided to quit from full-time advertising work. I wasn't involved in I retired from my day-to-day job. I was just involved occasionally in consultancy, but I wasn't involved in day-to-day anymore. And I jumped into this uncertain world of public speaking. I was 40, I was in the Philippines, and I remember, oh my gosh, I remember. So I've been working the rest of my life. There was a time that after I decided to retire, I took a 3-month vacation because in the Philippines they're only given 15 days a year, right? So
Yes.
this time I took advantage of, this is going to be the longest vacation I'm going to take. And I did a world tour. Like, I went to different countries. I went to Colombia, I went to Canada, I went to Australia, I went to New Zealand. I just went around. I said, for this moment, I'm going to discover who I am. I'm going to discover what it is that I want to do for the second phase of my life. And I want to discover what I'm meant to do. So I remember clearly, I was in Colombia when the thought crossed my mind that I want to become a speaker, because I was in a cafe in Medellin. I was in a cafe writing down in my notebook, what is it that I want? And one of the I was jotting down my strengths, and that's when it hit me. I think you're meant to be a speaker. So, of course, after 3 months, you got to fly back to the Philippines because money is running out. And I remember this. Oh my gosh, I remember this clearly. I was in the plane, I was asleep, and then subconsciously, my body sensed that the plane crossed the international date line, which means I'm near the Philippines. And I woke up in a state of existential panic. I was like, my gosh, what did I do? What am I going to do? I'm going to go home unemployed. I have no work. I have no job. What's going to happen? My gosh. I went into this existential angst. But as the plane was nearing the Philippines, there was something in my mind that was telling me, just trust the process. You don't know what's happening right now. You have no idea what's going to happen, but just trust it. So there's a funny story connected to this. I landed. I was traveling for 3 months, didn't get a haircut. First order of business, get a haircut. So I went from the airport, I went straight to the barber shop. And When I was in the barber shop, I got a text from somebody that I knew, 15 years ago. Like, I haven't spoken to her in 15 years. And she messaged me, Francis, are you still in advertising? I said, actually, I just retired from advertising. I'm actually doing public speaking right now. So, oh, that's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about, because I'm looking for a speaker who will speak in Creative Manila or Graphica Manila, which is like a big creative gathering in the Philippines. And it's all about how do you build your own personal brand. And I said, well, you that's exactly what I do. And oh my gosh, at that moment, I booked my first paid speaking gig, like 3 hours after landing in the Philippines. And that was for me an affirmation that when you're clear about what it is that you want, it's like the universe conspires to bring things your way. That was my first paid gig, and from then it just continued happening. So until the time I moved here to the United States. So that's the meaningful story.
I love, I love the foundation, the transitions, the beautiful, funny moments, the pivots, and then the answers to those existential questions that you found along the way, which I think is a real manifestation that you're doing what you're supposed to do, coming from all these signs and signals that are like literally coming your way. But I want to dissect that into smaller pieces because there are like a lot of interesting points on your story, especially when it comes to your background as a child and the family where you grew up in. You've spoken about the conservative family back home in the Philippines, your schooling, which is very much embracing the foundation of conservative Catholicism. But I do understand that, part of your journey of knowing yourself and embracing yourself is you being part of our beautiful LGBTQ plus community. And as we celebrate Pride Month right now, and I'm sure that folks who are younger, who are listening to us today, two middle-aged guys who came from the Philippines, from conservative families, attended Catholic schools there. How is that even possible? Can you share that part of your journey, the peaks, the troughs, the challenges, and how you've navigated your way through it while still being who you are, respecting your family, embracing your beliefs, but thriving as part of the community?
I've shared this many, many times. Like what I said, I'm growing up in this conservative Catholic organization. What you realize is that, you can't, there are certain things you can't talk about. And one of the things you can absolutely not talk about is your sexuality because it doesn't go against the norm, you know? And even worse, what happened to me was that I had internalized homophobia. So growing up, I not only was closeted, I was actively homophobic. So those are two things, right? To begin with, number one, being closeted is one thing. It's already tough to do that. But number two, I internalized my coping mechanism on the internalized homophobia was to express it openly because that's what was expected of me being in this community that I was. I was expected that you look down on gays. In fact, not just look down, you condemn gays, and I'm ashamed to admit this, but it's part of my truth. When I was younger, I wrote a lot of really, really hurtful homophobic stuff in the newspapers. But then, one of the things that I realized is that if there's an internal conflict within you, you're never truly happy. You're never happy. There's always this sense of unease, like something is wrong deep inside, right? And it took many, many years for me. You want to know when I came out? I had a midlife crisis at 40. I came out 10 years before that. I came out in my 30s, at 30 years old, right? So the first 30 years of my life, the first 3 decades of my life, I was just keeping things to myself until I worked in advertising. And if there's any industry where it's okay to be gay, it's really that industry in the Philippines, right? I started to meet gay friends and I started to have nice conversations with them. Little by little, all of those preconceived notions started to be disassembled in my brain. I remember I was having a conversation with a very, very good gay friend of mine, and he was just asking me, Francis, why don't you just come out of the closet? I mean, you're in advertising. It's not as if you're going to be stoned to death here, you know. And I said, you have to understand where I'm coming from. My community, my family, they're all ultra Catholic. The organization I belong to, my friends are ultra Catholic, and And it's not as easy for me to come out. And one of the things he said that was the initial crack that broke the shell was when he said, "What's the point of listening to all these other voices when you can't even hear your own?"
Mm.
And that for me was like, wow, okay, that was a eureka moment, right? That's right, right? I mean, what's the point of me trying to please everyone when deep inside myself, I'm not happy. I'm not being truthful to myself. So that's when I decided, okay, at 30, young age of 30 years old, I decided, I decided to come out. And then little by little, the fears that I had, I was so afraid that people were gonna condemn me. It didn't really materialize. Like when I told my siblings, when I told my sisters, the only comment they told me was that, brother, we kind of knew it all along. you know, we're just waiting for you to come out. And here I was afraid that they were gonna say, "That's bad, that's evil, don't do that," But they were very open. Did I lose some friends along the way? Definitely. I did lose some friends. Some friends distanced themselves from me. But then in the process, it also opens up space for new friends that learn to accept you for who you are. And for me, that's the greatest that's the greatest benefit I got from living my truth, where it revealed to you where you're meant to be, the
Mm.
circles you're meant to be, the community you're meant to belong to. So I hope that story helps somebody who's undergoing the same problem that I underwent before.
Again, a lot of commonalities because I myself, during that time, we grew up in the same generation. I
Hmm.
also had that very internalized homophobia. Deep inside me, I already know that, okay, I am gay, but you cannot accept it because of how gays were portrayed back home. And
Hmm.
then the stereotypical manifestations of if you're gay, you're going to be like this, or you're not going to be successful, or you're going to be a failure. You're going to be a reflection of this to your family, so on and so forth. But
Hmm.
fortunately, it's also great that you've mentioned that the advertising industry is very, should we say, LGBTQ plus friendly and open and
Hmm.
inclusive. They're more accepting, even during those days in the early 2000s, right? It's good that you found your safe space in your professional life in that industry as well. But what eventually triggered you to fall in love with advertising and also in marketing in general? What were you able to develop inside you that hit that combo of, yes, you're being LGBTQ plus and your love for advertising is a perfect combination that now allowed you to thrive and reach your full potential as a professional?
So, well, there's a funny story to that. So, at first, I wanted to become a television news anchor. So, I wanted to study journalism. Okay, but then the dean of the University of Asia and the Pacific, the dean who's in charge of the advertising degree there, the integrated marketing communication degree, he told me something funny. He said, "Walang pera dyan. There's no money there. You want to earn the big bucks, work in advertising." So that kind of like convinced me so to go into advertising. But joking aside, I think, the thing that I really love about advertising is that it forces you to be empathetic towards other people that are not you. Why? Because one of the most important lessons that was drilled to me even when I was a young advertiser was you have to put yourselves in the shoes of your consumers, even though you're not the consumer. Case in point. So it was my first day. It was my first day in the agency. They were gonna tell me what my account is. So similar to like Harry Potter, you're gonna be put into the house that you belong to, right? Your sorting hat, right? So my boss gave the sorting hat of what my first account would be. And my first account was Whisper, which is a sanitary napkin, okay? And a tampon. And the funny thing was, on the same day, two of us started working on the same day. Another one was a super girly girl, oh, I like big things. She got Motolite car battery. That was her first account. So I went to my boss and I said, "Why did you give Whisper to me, and why did you give Motolite to her? Shouldn't I mean, shouldn't it be the other way around? I think I know more a lot about car batteries than I do more about sanitary napkins, right? Because I've never menstruated in my life, right? And And you know what my boss said? He said that was a purposeful decision. The only reason why I gave you that is because I want you to be able to embrace this idea that many times you're going to have to think, understand the pain of people that are not you. Why whisper? You're not a female, you don't menstruate, but you need to be able to understand what are the pain points they undergo. And that for me was very powerful because it was like a lesson in empathy. The idea is that I'm
Mm.
not just here to sell to you. My job is to understand what your pain is. What are you struggling with? What's the problem you're trying to solve? What's the thing that keeps you awake at night? And to offer a solution. And that solution is normally hope based. You're suffering from cramps. There's hope for that. You're suffering from a headache. There's hope for that. And that's what made me fall in love with advertising. The ability to be able to tell creative stories based on that empathy. It's a mixture of art and creativity. I'm not just doing things for art's sake, just to express myself, but I'm also doing something to be able to solve a problem for somebody.
That is such a great anecdote again, Francis. Love how your mentor during that time in your first agency made you realize on your first day the importance of having empathy and compassion
Mm,
towards your customers and your audience, because you're not just there to write copy or to
mm,
create art or visuals just because you need to sell the product, but
mm,
us being able to put ourselves in the shoes of our audience and our potential or prospect customers is something that will really hit home when it comes to making sure that the objectives of the clients are met.
mm,
So, for prospective young advertising folks who are listening to us today, the media landscape has
mm,
changed massively, because back in the day we call it try media. I haven't
mm.
heard of that term for like the longest time.
No.
Right, exactly. Now it has changed massively because it's beyond 360 now, because like omnipresence all around thanks to social media and even AI now that is being part of the media plans of brands and clients. So for younger folks who would want to venture into advertising or marketing communications, what would be your thoughts or tips or tricks or questions for
Mm,
them to realize if this is really the right industry or the right field
mm,
for them, number one. And then
mm,
second, if they're gonna dip their toes into that water and test it, if it's really the right industry for
mm.
them, how will they realize and how will they have that eureka moment that you had experience that will make them, say that this is my niche, this is where I belong, and this is what I'm gonna pursue?
Well, to begin with, if you're a young person wanting to enter the world of advertising or marketing communication, the first thing I want to tell you is that it's tough as hell. It's not an easy career to get into. I mean, it eats up so much of your personal time. It demands a lot of sacrifice. So let's start off with that, because again, it's very easy to want to enter a field because you feel like it's the coolest place to be in, right? Oh, this is a cool career to be in. It's fun. But you don't notice the hard work that goes behind the scenes. So I want to start it off with that. But I also want to transition it precisely to before you even enter into this career, you want to ask yourself, what is the purpose that's driving you to go into this? I'll admit, okay, at the beginning, I went into advertising because I wanted to earn money. I mean, that's the reason why I didn't take up journalism. I took up advertising because of that thing that Dean told me, right? But when there comes a time in the middle of the stress, in the middle of the nonstop client requests, when you realize that money is not everything. And as cliche as that sounds, it's really true. And you want to now go into the deeper reason why. You know, for me, if you want to get into advertising, first and foremost, we go back to what I talked about earlier, empathy. The best way for you to know if this is the career for you, how good are you at empathizing with your customer? Because ultimately, regardless of the client that you get, you're going to get different clients. You're going to get a tech client that wants you to sell their latest phone. You're going to get a client that wants you to sell their toy. Hello, one of my favorite clients is a funeral home. So I have to sell death, you know, at least respect for the dead.
Yeah.
So regardless of the client that you have, one thing is that they're going to have customers that have problems because otherwise the business isn't going to exist if there wasn't anyone that had a problem that the product was going to solve. So what you need to be able to do is go into the mindset of these customers. You're like a psychologist. You're trying to figure out what makes this customer tick, and more importantly, what's the biggest problem of this customer. I always tell people the customer's greatest frustrations should be your greatest source of inspiration. You have to see what the frustration of the customer is, because unless you understand the deeper problem of the customer, you're not going to be able to come up with something to solve it. But the second thing that you also need to embrace in advertising is the ability to tell a story in a way that nobody else has told it.
Mm.
When people ask me, what is the definition of creativity? For me, creativity is finding hidden connections when none seem to exist. So part of the thrill of advertising for me is finding that hidden connection. Like, how can I make this connect with this and it makes sense? So if you want to get into this field, how will you know that you're meant to be in it? Because you're capable of understanding what the pain of the customer is and figuring out an unorthodox way to tell the story of hope for that consumer. Because any ad is a message of hope. You're telling them, I have the potential solution for your problem.
Those are great, should we say, openers for folks who are thinking about exploring their career in advertising. And I love how you're able to define our industry and what it takes to be in it, despite the glitz and the glam, the people. And I'll admit it, when I was young, it was my motivation as well. My motivation to enter as an assistant brand manager for a company during that time, back in the early 2000s, was because I want to put the sash to the winner of Binibining Pilipinas, because typically an ABM or a BM will be the one to do so, which I know was so dense. But after I went into that phase and realizing that, oh my God, it's not the glitz, the glam. It takes a lot of hard work. It takes a lot of creativity. It takes a lot of figuring things out when it comes to how you can support the business and address the challenges of the end customer. So thank you so much for sharing that with folks who are listening to us today. The other thing that I've observed when I was listening to you, and my reaction every time you tell the story, I can't help but giggle, but laugh as well, because like the way you deliver your answers and your stories, like so hilariously funny. And it made me realize why you are suddenly now into improv, into comedy as well, as you tell your very engaging story, which I think is one of your superpowers, Francis. Why, a very straightforward story can be more engaging, more interesting, more humorous, and will stick to me as your listener. Where did that come from? How did that, improv comedy interest start in you? And how did you integrate that in the way you do things or the way you story tell?
So again, improv was a result of the midlife crisis at 40. And when I went back to the Philippines to become a speaker, right? I started to ask myself, okay, what would be interesting tools that I wanna invest in to become a better speaker. And coincidentally, one of my schoolmates, he was the founder of the first ever improv comedy group in the Philippines. So his name is Gabe Mercado, and they founded Spit, which is the Silly People's Improvisational Theater. And one day I was in Starbucks and then I met him there. I saw him there by coincidence, and we were just catching up. And he told me, we were offering this improv course if you're interested in taking it. And I said, okay, why not take it? I mean, when I took it, I had no illusions of becoming a comedian. I just wanted to try something new, learn something new. And it was in the process of taking up improv that I realized that, oh my gosh, improv is beyond just the performance. It's really a mind opener. It opens you up to being flexible, to being open to new ideas. It unlocks your creativity in a way that you don't expect. That's why I always recommend to everyone that I meet, like no exception, take up improv comedy, because one of the things that it opened up to me was the power of saying yes. As you grow older, one of the things I discovered as I grew older, I tend to say no more, because you're older, you're more cautious. So you tend to put barriers to things. Oh, that's impossible, that's difficult. No, we shouldn't do that, etc. But in improv, you can't do that. When you're on stage, the goal is to always say yes. That's like one of the fundamental rules on improv, and you're trained to be comfortable with saying yes even to things that you're not used to. In advertising, when we deal with clients, right? We're trained already to start saying no. Oh no, the client won't like that. Oh, this creative idea, I don't think it's gonna work. I think the client's gonna hate that, right? But in improv, when you're on stage, is if the person acting with you says, "Reverend sister, what are we going to do with the convent?" You can't say, "Oh no, I'm a dude, man. I'm not gonna play a sister. I'm a dude, man." No, you accept it and you say, "My daughter, how are we going to punish? How do we solve a problem like Maria?" So so you have to accept it, and that's one of the things that opened my eyes to it. Comedy, people are always saying that, "Oh, you're funny," and I like to believe I'm very funny by nature, because whenever I hang out with friends and I tell stories, they laugh like crazy, and there a lot of people have said, "Why don't you try doing that?" So I did it, and I fell in love with it. Now, the funny thing, stand-up comedy is like a completely different animal altogether. So improv is all about reacting to what's put in front of you. Saying yes to the moment, watching out for other people. That's one of the fundamental lessons of improv. You got to have each other's backs. When you're on stage, you got to protect one another. That's one of the things I loved about it. When I moved here to Boston in the middle of the pandemic, I had another crisis. I said, I want to do something new. So I decided to sign up for stand-up comedy, right? And stand-up comedy now is the exact opposite of improv. Now I know why it's kind of rare to find people that do improv and stand-up comedy, because they're kind of different disciplines. Improv, like what he said, no script. Stand-up comedy is all about the script. It's all about writing those jokes and perfecting them, like rehearsing them over and over and over again until you get it perfectly. You know? So it unlocked a new skill for me. And the new skill for me was how to discipline myself and write down things and rehearse them over and over again. Stand up comedy taught me the art of perseverance, because I'm a very impatient person. I don't want to keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. But I discovered from my stand up comedy teachers that the best comedians perform that same gig, that same 15-minute gig, hundreds of times before they get their Netflix show. So I said, okay, that's right. So I got to be patient. I got to do this same shtick over and over again, hundreds of times, until I get my own Netflix special.
Nice. I mean, it's very inspiring for me, Francis, because the way you've positioned it is like there are a lot of reasons for us to say no, and a
Mm,
lot of reasons for us not to try things because of the stereotypical preconceived notions of limitations or our personal imposter syndrome that I'm not built for that. It's not part of my talents or my borrowed skills, for example. I'm not trained for that. I'm too old for it. But it's very inspiring to hear from someone who managed to hit these new milestones and try new things
mm,
after hitting 40. Because for some people, especially the younger folks, probably they would think, oh my God, 40 is like so old already. But I think it opens a new meaning or definition when it comes to the saying life begins at 40. Because
yeah.
to your point and in your experience, definitely they're like a new set of milestones that you've unlocked when you hit the big 40, and then now you ventured into public speaking and in training as well, and you're doing improv. The question that I had in mind was like, is there a way for you to mesh all three together and apply that professionally in what you're doing? What were the great examples of how you're able to sell the experience to the client
Mm,
or sell the ad idea to end customers?
yeah.
Because if such cases really exist, that for me is a great example on a
Mm,
personal level that the saying that find your passion
mm.
points, combine them all together and do that as your work, and you would feel that you're not working, you're just simply going to enjoy it. That is very meaningfully inspiring for folks. So what's your take on that?
So there right now in my life, there's a triangle, right? So you have your advertising and marketing, you have your public speaking and training, and then you have the comedy performance, right? So how do they work well together? Again, it's a matter of you extracting skills from one department and moving it to the other. For example, advertising. How do I apply humor in advertising, the idea of getting your client to say yes and your idea. I told you, one of my favorite clients right now is a funeral home. So in the Philippines, we handled a funeral home there called St. Peter Funeral Homes. Now, every single you've seen funeral home ads, right? How would you describe a funeral home ad? If I were to ask you, Joseph, how would you describe a funeral home ad?
Well, it's very sad.
Very, very
So-
solemn.
Solemn, yeah.
Rest in peace. Eternal
Correct.
your loved ones. In fact, when we before we took on this client, we did an audit of all of the funeral home ads we could find for all the competing funeral homes in the Philippines, and we discovered all of them use the same boring Times New Roman font.
Mm.
All of them use the same imagery. It was either a grandfather and a granddaughter looking out into the sunset, a pair of doves flying out into the sunset, or it was a sunset. So I don't know what's with funerals. They seem to love sunsets, right? And all of them have the logo of that olive branch with the Times New Roman
Yes.
picture of the owner or whatever, right? So when we got this new client and they wanted us to do their ads, I I was talking to them and I said, do we run ads exactly like everyone else? Because look at all these ads; they all look and feel the same way. For us to be able to create a great ad, we have to understand that the behavior of people when it comes to funeral homes is not the same as the behavior of consumers when it comes to, let's say, a coffee shop like Starbucks. What do I mean by that? So, let's say the consumer is scrolling through Facebook and then they see an ad for Starbucks. It's very realistic for the consumer to say, oh, you know what? I think I want to get a coffee, right? But let's say the customer is scrolling through Instagram and they see an ad for a funeral home. No customer is going to say, OMG, that casket is so me. Wrap that baby up. Add the part. No customer is going to say, oh my gosh, you've convinced me to get cremated. Let's get cremated today at this moment. Burn, baby, burn. You know, no customer thinks that. But however, there's one thing I'm absolutely sure of our customers. Not 80, not 90, not even 99%. A full 100% of the people who will see our social media ads will eventually need the services of a funeral. It is not a
True.
matter of if, but a matter of when. So, our job is when the time inevitably comes that they need our service, they remember our brand name. If we do our ads like everyone else, they will never remember us. So, our strategy, go into how Filipinos cope with tragedy. We don't want to talk about death. So, how do we promote a funeral home when we can't talk about death, right? Let's go into how Filipinos cope with tragedy. How do we cope? We cope with humor. We laugh at it. That's why, when a volcano erupts in the Philippines, memes. When a flood hits Manila, Little Mermaid memes in the streets
Yeah.
of Manila, Atlantis in Manila, So people cope with tragedy using humor. So why can't we do the same for a funeral home? Our strategy was that every single St. Peter ad was going to be irreverent, unexpected, and funny. We were going to put the fun in funeral. And we created an ad that, oh my God, it became viral. Why? Because at first glance, the ad looks like a cosmetic ad. So, you have,
Oh my god, I remember this.
yes, it's a girl. So there's a girl, and then, they're putting powder on her face, but her eyes are closed the entire time, right? And then at the end, there's just a simple Tagalog tagline, parang natutulog lang. In English, it means it's like she's sleeping. And that's a line people only say in a funeral, right? When they look into the casket, how's lolo? How's grandfather? Oh, parang natutulog lang. It's like he's asleep. So when people saw that, that's when it dawned on them, oh my gosh, she's dead. And that video became viral. It's crazy. Humor for a funeral home. What was the other crazy humorous thing that we did? Again, jumping off from this idea of yes ending things. That pink casket of St. Peter, we made those into selfie booths. So the logo of St. Peter right now is a pink casket. And again, we chose hot pink. Why hot pink? Because it's a different color, right? We used that as a selfie booth. We deployed them across all cemeteries in the Philippines on November 1 as photo booths. And oh my gosh, we trended on social media. And
It's
of course,
crazy, but it's hilarious. But it's very creative and it's very smart.
and where is St. Peter right now? They're market
Uh,
leader.
wow.
They're top of
Wow.
mind. They're 90% top of mind. You yank a Filipino in the middle of the street, you ask them, what's the first brand that comes to your mind when I say funeral home? 9 out of 10 will say St. Peter. Hello, during the pandemic, we also came up with a meme. The meme was very simple: 6 feet apart or 6 feet under. A public service reminder to practice social distancing from St. Peter funeral homes. The second one: stay at home or stay with us. And again, these ads exploded like crazy because we used humor in my stand-up comedy. How do I apply what I learned in advertising in when I do stand-up comedy gigs? One of the most important lessons that my advertising mentor, Mon Jimenez, taught me was the power of the latag. So latag is a Tagalog
Mm.
word which roughly translates to, I don't know, preparing the ground to receive
It's
the
like the
message,
setup. Yeah.
setting it up,
Yeah.
doing the setup. And I remember he would tell me, before you reveal a slide, what you say before the slide is most important, because what you want by the time you reveal the slide, your client is already thinking about what your idea is based on what the things that you say. And the same is true in stand up. Before I reveal a joke, you I have to tell a story before the joke, and the objective of the story is to let the audience start to fill in the blanks in their mind, so that when the time comes for you to reveal the joke, they've already thought of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really a synergy. That's why I always say nothing is wasted. When you learn something new, nothing is wasted, because you can always figure out a way to use that skill somewhere else.
Love those specific examples. Now I realize that I now know the brains of those amazing ads. I was like, there's like pure genius. And I think that's a great manifestation or a great proof that, navigating advertising and advocacy with humor and heart, it's really very possible. It's
Mhm.
something that folks embrace and be mindful of. If that's their passion, and it's a matter of really truly understanding, having the experience, having the hard work and the learning process to be able to reach that point. So now I want to ask you, especially that we're celebrating the Pride Month. You're now living here in the U.S. Within the context of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, the country really truly embrace the uniqueness of the community, and they celebrate the beauty of diversity and creativity, especially within that community. Now that you're here and you're applying the pure genius that you were trained back home in the Philippines and in Asia, what would be your thoughts or inspiring words for folks who would want to be where you are, one, two, who would want to break the glass ceiling, realizing that, okay, I'm a person of color, I'm Asian, it's impossible for me to be in this situation, to start on my own and to thrive there.
Mm.
And then lastly, number three, in a very competitive world where there seems to be no seat or no space for everyone,
Mm.
how do you navigate that journey and inspire folks that, similar to your story, it is possible, being Asian, being gay, being relatively old, and having that second wind to be able to find your groove again and continuously thrive?
So it all boils down to you being honest about your truth. The greatest stories I tell, the greatest successes I've had, the greatest lessons that I get are all because of mistakes I have done in the past. Character flaws, sometimes we're too harsh on ourselves. Like, who we were in the past, we still judge ourselves on that. Because if I were to judge myself on who I was in the past, my gosh, I'll cancel myself. But one of the things that I love about living here in the United States is that it provides you an opportunity to be very transparent and candid with your truth. And part of the truth is also acknowledging your shortcomings in the past. Because I think we need to be able to tell people that you can transform. You can be a complete jerk in the past, but you can always be better. That's why for me, I'm kind of iffy on this cancel culture mindset, because for me, I think people deserve the grace to be able to demonstrate that they've changed. So for me, part of you becoming powerful is talking about your truth, which includes everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Because the best stories I'm able to share, whether I'm giving an inspirational talk, Whether I'm on stage as a stand-up comedian, the best stories I'm able to share come from my stupid mistakes of the past.
Mm.
So it's not something to be ashamed of. So if you're an LGBT person, if you're an Asian, right? Let's face it, a lot of us in the past have gone through so much trauma. But we have a choice. We can either suppress that trauma, we can make that trauma the only thing that we talk about. I am a product of my trauma, period. Or we can use the trauma to push us to transform into somebody better. As cliche as it is, from the messes come the messages, right?
Mm.
So from whatever mess that happened in our lives in the past, that's where the messages come from. Now, I like what you mentioned about in this competitive world, right, where it feels like there's no seat for us on the table. How do we grab our chair on the table? One of the things that I discovered is that if you are truthful and sincere about who you are, you don't really need to grab a seat in the table because they will offer the seat to you.
Mm. That's beautiful.
And I feel like that's where we want to be. So many times as Asians, we're trained to keep quiet, especially Filipinos, Let's hide. Let's hide in the background. Let's just do our work well. Let's care for other people to the point that sometimes we don't even care for ourselves, right? But then that also becomes our greatest strength because we're so good at working behind the scenes, we're
Mm.
actually quietly climbing up the ranks.
That is great advice, Francis. And I love, again, the anecdotes that you've shared. But unfortunately, I need to ask you our last question.
Hmm.
And that last question is the same last question that I ask all my guests.
Hmm.
And that would be, what does a meaningful life mean to you, and how do you continuously live that every day? I particularly love, the story when, when I asked you the first question, when you quoted the line from the book The Alchemist, where in, if you really want something in this world, the world will conspire to give it to you. How do you continuously live that in your every single breathing
Hmm.
moment, and how do you plan to continuously live that?
I'm one of the things that I realize being at my age is that I feel like I have less days ahead than days behind. So I think that affects you. And for me, when I talk about meaningfulness in my life, I'm already beyond the point where I need to prove myself. Rather, for me, meaning is derived from me making sure that every person that I interact with leaves the interaction with me being better than they were. I always tell my employees this right now, that sometimes I'll admit, sometimes I can be very strict with my employees, or I can be very demanding with my employees, but I always remind them that if I do get mad, if I do scold them, if I do correct them, the goal for me and my best ambition is that they become better than me. It's not my goal to be the best. My goal is I want to train people to be better than me. Because I know that if you've left the company for whatever reason, if you leave the company but you're better than me, you become more successful than me, I know I've done my job. That for me is how I derive meaning. The idea that you always want to leave this positive mark in people's lives. You want to be able to, at least in one, even in a tiny way, help them move beyond you, meaning become better than you. And I feel like if that was the personal philosophy of every person in the world, it'll be heaven to live in this world. One of the things I always tell in team building exercises, in when I give inspirational talks to people, we live in a very competitive world, right? Our companies are competitive, the world is competitive. But if there's something that I want you guys to be competitive in, it's this. I want you to be competitive in outdoing one another, in helping one another. That's the goal. Imagine if everyone's obsession is for us to be competitive with other people just to help them out. My gosh, our world's going to be in a good place to be in. So there.
That is, again, beautiful. Really love that great wisdom that you've shared there, Francis. And it's filled with not just humor, but with heart, with humility. And I fully agree. If we can all embrace that great piece of advice, the world will be in a much better place than, how we found it. So I think now I want to give you the floor because I'm sure a lot of people would want to ask more questions to you or would probably want to collaborate with you, considering the brilliance of this amazing mind and output, especially when it comes to creativity, public speaking, and training. The floor is yours. Let folks know how they can reach out to you and how they can send their inquiries to you.
So the best way is, well, for advertising services, go to our website, tagline360.com. But if you want training, go to my LinkedIn, Francis Miranda, or even Instagram. Reach out to me there. I'll be glad to connect with you and help you create an amazing team building experience or training experience. So
Thank you so much again, Francis. Really appreciate it. And happy Pride to you.